we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time listening, welcome. If not, welcome back. Like I always say, if you're watching on YouTube, please hit the bell and like and subscribe to our channel. I know it doesn't seem like much, but it helps a lot, especially if you can give us a 5-star review wherever you're listening as well. Please tell your friends if you like the podcast, so you can spread the word. If you ever wanted to let us know about topics for a new podcast, or let us know about anything, hit us up in our DMs on Instagram or our Twitter at Bigmark at the Bigmark Pod or at the Bigmark Podcast, depending on where you're finding us. And then you have our Patreon too. If you want to support the podcast in any way, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. There's different levels of ways you can help out the podcast there. So any little bit helps. Thank you so much. And welcome to the show. It's Marky Algorithms today. I'm trying to get on this little bandwagon of, who knows, honestly. I was looking at the topic today and doing my research and everything, getting ready for it. And I'm like, does anyone else kind of even care about this? The people who aren't necessarily listening to these podcasts. So, I'm sure everyone out there has their favorite podcasts and listens to different ones. And, it's not, there's millions of podcasts out there, I'm pretty sure now, millions, at least hundreds of thousands. And, obviously not everyone listens to the same ones, but obviously there's popular ones. And, in this story, we got a lot of big players. I mean, you're talking about Joe Rogan, who's essentially one of the biggest podcasters. Obviously not for everyone out there. Not everyone listens to him. He's not, everyone's cup of tea. But, some of these giant podcasts, all these other ones that are relatively popular kind of stem from what Joe's doing. And essentially because Joe Rogan's whole approach, for anyone who doesn't know, for probably about a decade, he told every one of his guests that he had on his podcast that he was, when things were just kind of starting for the Joe Rogan Experience, he's like, you should start a podcast, man. You have good stories and you talk well, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of people took him up on that, and they rode the wave of the podcast boom. And now they have some serious podcasts. Most of these guys are stand-up comedians as well. A lot of people I've even talked about on this podcast, and a lot of them have gotten into podcasting through Joe Rogan. So again, not everyone listens to him, but he's one of the biggest podcasters in the world with millions of listeners. So he obviously has some credibility, sway, influence, to say the least. So the big issue that's going on right now, for everyone who doesn't know, and you might not know, listen to my show, but if you do listen to any of these other podcasts, I'm talking about Brendan Schaub, I'm talking about Bobby Lee, Brian Callen, obviously, like I said, Joe Rogan's in the mix. So all these podcasts that you might know some of these podcasters from, they're all kind of involved here. So I'm going to start with Brendan Schaub here. So Brendan Schaub, if you've never heard of him, he's a co-host of The Fighter and the Kid with Brian Callen. They're both stand-up comedians. Brian Callen's a big player in this story. The Fighter and the Kid is an interesting podcast. It's pretty jocular. I don't know how many. I don't know what their group of listeners are like, or what should I say, their demographic is like, to say. I'm not exactly sure. But it's kind of more jocular comedy. And in fact, one of my favorite podcasts, which is one of the best podcasts and best uses of the format, is The Fighter and the Kid, episode 370 with Krista Lee and Will Sasso. Say what you will about anyone who's involved with this. In fact, that episode didn't actually have Schaub in it, but anyone else involved with it, you know who I'm talking about. Take it or leave it, but it's tremendous, hilarious, just nonsense, and it's so funny. One of my favorite podcasts ever. Brendan Schaub is a pretty new comedian. He's only kind of a few years into it, and according to everyone, it usually takes 10 to sometimes 15 years for comedians to really get their feet under them. And I think that yeah, maybe there's some breakout stars, obviously, and I'm sure that there's guys that make it before then, but it's extremely rare because I think a lot of it has to do with other comedians feeling like this comedian hasn't cut their chops enough, or like they don't deserve it if they're making it early. But Schaub has some natural talents, and he was a UFC fighter and played NFL or played UFC. He played football in college and almost had a chance at the NFL. And he was on The Ultimate Fighter, actually. I think the first season of Ultimate Fighter he might have been on. But I remember watching that because it was on. It was interesting, and he was part of it. He has a really good story from that if you want to go check it out. The other main player, of course, is Bobby Lee. Bobby Lee is the man. I love Bobby Lee. I think he's great. You'd probably recognize him, see him. If you don't know him, go check him out. I know him first from Mad TV, who he was actually on with Brian Callen, which is interesting. So they've known each other for friggin' decades, and I'll get into some heaviness with them. So again, this is mostly between Bobby and Brendan, the heat. But Bobby's girlfriend Kalila is also a key player here. She's the co-host of Tiger Belly with Bobby Lee, and she's also the co-host of her own podcast, Trash Tuesday, with Annie Letterman and Esther Pavitsky. And to get into what the real nuts and bolts are about this whole story is, on January 25th, it all kind of started. I mean, I guess this started years ago, but the most recent stuff right now started on January 25th, 2022. So this year, just a couple months ago. Annie on the Trash Tuesday podcast told a story about an unnamed comedian who tried to get her to walk to his truck with him, and I don't know, who knows, blow him or whatever. And she mentioned it was a very unfunny comedian, which is a huge clue. Unfortunately, they're obviously talking about Brendan Schaub here. Kalila also says that this comedian, aka Brendan Schaub, was in her DM 7 years ago. And Kalila joked in that same episode that one day she's going to send the receipts to Dumois, which is a gossip website. If you haven't heard of it, it's just kind of like, the new National Enquirer, or that kind of feel, just like dishes and like info on things that are happening in Hollywood. So about a month later, on February 23rd, 2022, Brendan texts Bobby that he's been being harassed for 6 years with death threats and Reddit hate, and he found out that the hate may be coming from the Tiger Belly team. He's hired monster lawyers, and he's got friends in dark places, and he wants Bobby to fix it. And obviously Bobby says he'll tell Kalila because it's obviously kind of not even Bobby's fault here, right? Like, it's not fair to even, have Bobby, but I guess Brendan and Kalila don't know each other very well, so this is the way he did it. So I guess overnight wasn't quick enough for Brendan, so Brendan calls Bobby the next day, and he tells Bobby to get in touch with the Trash Tuesday girls and tell them to go on the podcast and say that the stories weren't about him. So already Brendan's trying to, I guess, bury it. So I don't think that they did. But Brendan was kind of threatening Bobby and Kalila with dirt that he had on him, on both of them, that if they didn't do something about the Reddit hate, he was going to release. And the dirt was that Bobby and Kalila had an open relationship. Now, obviously, this was supposed to be private information between Bobby and Kalila, which Bobby actually said he wanted to take to his grave, but Bobby and Kalila, I think they felt like they needed to get ahead of the information. And when they were on the H3 podcast, which is another podcast, that kind of is in the LA scene, let's just put it that way, hosted by Ethan and Hilla Klein, they went on to interview Bobby and Kalila about what was happening and, what the beef was, because it was already starting to get out. And H3 podcast has a little bit of a trashy journalism kind of feel about it. Again, Bobby didn't really want to talk about what was going on. But Ethan kind of like eked it out of him. You could kind of see that they egged Bobby and Kalila to kind of talk about the open relationship and what was going on with Schaub and everybody. And you could tell Bobby didn't really want to talk about it. He was being pretty quiet about it. But Kalila was there, and she kind of wanted to push to it. You could tell that she was really upset and offended. I'll get into some other reasons or some other thoughts I have about the whole thing, but where she's coming from and how she's doing it, it seems to just be a very defensive position, and she just seems to kind of be in the, like, coming from the stance of, I don't think what's going on here is true. I want to know about it without. It's almost like a deflection. She doesn't want to look at herself and realize that maybe she did something wrong, not crazy wrong, not cancelable, not like brutal, but, you know, making fun of Schaub and saying he's not funny. Like, you know, he's a comedian. You're saying he's not funny. You know, it's like telling a fucking athlete that they're not good at sports. Like, I don't know. It's like, it's hurtful, especially to someone like Schaub. No offense, brother, but, you know, we got meathead status here. I'm with you. I'm in the same fucking boat. But, you know, that would fucking hurt. So, again, I kind of get where everyone's coming from here, but I'll get into that later. So, after the H3 podcast and Bobby and Clyde is talking about everything they didn't want to fucking ever talk about, early in April this year, 2022, if anyone's listening to this in another year, whoa, hopefully we'll see you then. This is like time travel. So early in April, Dumois actually released an article about 3 young female comedian podcasters who were being sued by a larger podcast. So this is how Dumois is. They're kind of like, nothing's like for sure. I'm sure it's just a tactic to kind of cover their own asses, that if they're ever fucking actually questioned about the shit that they do, they can just fall back and say, that's not who I meant. So it's all this like weird implication shit. But anyway, obviously, the Trash Tuesday girls saw this and were like, oh my God, this must be about us. So on April 13th, on a live Trash Tuesday podcast, the girls spoke about the article. Like I said, they obviously thought it was the fighter and the kid suing them. And Kalila calls whoever it was, even though in their minds, they know it's Brendan Schaub. They say they called him a little bitch, and they said the dirt isn't even a real threat. She said, come at me, and he calls him unfunny again. And Kalila claims this is how they found out that they were being sued by Brendan, was through this article. Now, I wonder how that's the only way you find out. Like, I know people get served, and like maybe that's how fucking quick the news goes, but you'd think that Kalila would know that, and Trash Tuesday people or whoever would know they're being sued before like the media does. I guess shit happens, but you think that they'd be able to check and call their lawyers and do all this stuff. And, you know, Kalila mentioned that whole Dumois thing in January in that earlier podcast, and it's like, did that give someone the idea to maybe leak something to Dumois, or was, you know, Kalila involved in the leak? And she put it out there to be like, look, he's suing us, and he's obviously going over the top here just because we called him unfunny and we leaked this story about him cheating and shit. At the beginning of May then, so, you know, about a month later, less than a month later, Schaub told Callan about the harassment, and I guess Schaub had kept all this quiet. He never really talked about it. He apparently isn't really on social media himself. His team takes care of everything. And, you know, he told Brian that it was potentially coming from the Tiger Belly and Bobby and Kalila. And Brian fucking legitimately snapped. Now, Brian and Callan went on their podcast on The Fighter and the Kid, and they talked about this and addressed everything, and Schaub came out and talked about it, but Brian came out and talked about it, but I guess Brian literally had no idea all these B names. Brian never really understood what Brendan was going through. So when Brendan told him all this shit that was happening, you know, after what Kalila thinks after the Trash Tuesday thing, you know, maybe even Brian was just like, what the fuck are all these girls talking about? But eventually Schaub does eventually tell Callan, and then Callan, I guess, never understood, and he is a protective kind of person. That's kind of a friend Brian Callan is, and, you know, he kind of twisted it into this whole, like, it's loyalty and I overreacted and all this stuff, but legitimately Schaub and Callan called Bobby and freaked out. Told him to get a hold of his woman, that he's a coward, that he can't control his girlfriend, that his career was over, that they were going to tell Rogan about this and it was all going to be over, etc., which is like, again, fucking Joe Rogan he's not the godfather of podcasts, but again, crazy. Like, I don't know if it got to physical threats, but Bobby at one point said, I felt physically threatened. That's how heavy he said. Every time I even think about it, I start to tremble. And now some of the abhorrent kind of shit that was being thrown around was definitely said by Callan. Again, he friggin' snapped. And again, he's coming from an area he doesn't even fucking have all the information, and he's tripping balls. So it's like, is that just, is that just pure reaction? Or, what did Schaub tell Callan, right? Now, like I mentioned, Schaub and Callan went on The Fighter and the Kid, and they Callan spoke right into the camera and was like, I'm sorry, I take full responsibility. It was kind of weird. It was probably one of the most aggressive apologies I've ever seen. He's like, yeah, I made this phone call and I told them and I said all this crazy shit and I'm sorry about it. And it was like it was just like that kind of aggressive, honest, I guess, aggressively honest vibe. Now, did that indicate that maybe Brian wasn't 100% behind it? No, I don't think so. But I think him and Bobby go back really far. And I think maybe Callan hopes that this didn't ruin their relationship, but there's a very good chance it did. So maybe Callan's coming from an angle that kind of says, yes, I did what I did, but I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. It was reactionary and I said something, and please forgive me because you love me and I love you. But that doesn't always happen with anybody. Relationships or friendships aren't always mended that easily. And it wasn't right. And again, Callan and Schaub looked right into the camera and said this, and it's super heavy. And it seems like Schaub is getting a little bit of backlash for what Brian said too. Because obviously Kalila then got her back up too with, how Bobby was, because Bobby was obviously really upset about it. He's a pretty sensitive dude. I think obviously Schaub was hurt and felt threatened, and that he thought his career was in jeopardy, with obviously his endorsements and sponsors and TV shows and this and that. It's not good. Some of these networks don't want to hear about you, being a womanizer or, slipping into DMs or this and that. And then obviously his family, trying to protect his family and keep everything together. So later on May 14th, Brendan actually went on Tiger Belly to discuss the events, which is interesting. You can say what you will about the guy, but, to go on, for lack of a better word, your enemy's podcast and go into enemy territory and try and stand up for yourself, or at least clarify things a little bit more. I respect that, of course. It's interesting kind of what they say, what the Tiger Belly team says is that, after the podcast they do with Brendan, he stuck around for a little bit and he's much different off camera than he is on, which is interesting. So again, a lot of this shit is about appearances too, right? It's fucking Hollywood. Like, your appearance potentially means everything, right? So if you can't keep that up, you have nothing, right? So when they were on the podcast, Schaub said he didn't hold Bobby and Kalila personally responsible at that point. He just wanted it to stop. But again, he's claiming it's coming from their team, whatever that means. So there's probably everyone on their team is in the room. And so Schaub's sitting in there going, it's someone from your team, not you two. So it's someone else in the room? What are you saying? I never really understood that. And then even though he came at Bobby so hard, so I guess he came at Bobby so hard because he thought Bobby was responsible for the Reddit shit, which is also wild. Again, these are the reasons why Kalila is going, this doesn't quite make sense. Did you do this? Did you come up with all this because you're mad at the girls for saying what they said, and you came up with this whole other angle so that you could come at us in a legal fashion, even though Schaub denies that he was suing anyone. So he also denies the Annie Lederman story. He fully admits that he was in Kalaila's DMs, but Kalaila still thinks this is where the beef actually started, along with what they said in the live show. So, Schaub went into saying, he doesn't really, agree that that he's going to go after them legally. There's another kind of angle that had legal action involved with it, which I'll get to in a sec, but it's super strange, and I understand why the timeline seems funky. Schaub obviously went into speaking about the hate he was receiving for the last 7 years and the death threats and everything. So I guess he was receiving hate I don't know if it was in general, if it was specifically around the DMs, or somehow that got out already or whatever. But I think somehow Kalaila also mentions, I feel like because Schaub doesn't really understand how Reddit and everything works, that he thought it was actually coming from the Tiger Belly team, even though it might have been someone just vaguely associated with them, or again, just somehow as soon as Bobby and Tiger Belly was connected with the hate that Schaub was already receiving, it was like, boom, that's it. He knew it 100%. Finally, there's a face to the name. Because again, this could have all just been coming randomly. But again, he's getting this information from his team because he doesn't really even go on social media himself. So there's a lot of weird fucking ins and outs of this. So because of all that hate that Schaub's been getting, that's why he doesn't use social media. And again, that's why he's not in the loop. So I feel like it's this weird fucking telephone game that's going on. And according to Brendan Schaub's team, the actual legal implications that were happening is that in the Reddit forum, there was actually evidence of child abuse happening. So I guess, I don't know if it was a moderator or if it was someone involved with the group. Again, I don't even know how fucking Reddit works either, but someone was posting videos, or they had been posting videos of child abuse. So now the feds were involved, and Brendan says he has pages of proof of everything to say that Tiger Belly was involved, blah, 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 but he can't send them to Tiger Belly because of the feds. Schaub also claims that the open relationship dirt wasn't the dirt that he has on Kalaila and Bobby, which is really interesting. It's kind of a shady, veiled threat. But again, this whole thing with the feds is super, super bizarre. It's kind of like, are you just introduced? It's almost like he's just trying to create these scenarios where he thinks, okay, this is going to get them to just roll over and say, I'm sorry, and it's going to be over. It's very reactionary. I don't know if it's all just a weird timing thing. It's just very, very strange. After that Tiger Belly episode with Schaub, Brendan showed Kalaila and Bobby and the rest of the team 2 really zoomed in screenshots that actually came from Brian Callen, of these weird documents, this weird HTML code. It wasn't even really real, nothing you could actually see. But apparently Bobby's name, which is Robert Lee, which is hilarious. I wonder if his middle name starts with an E, but Robert Lee was up in the corner of one of the screenshots, and then the Tiger Belly official email was on another, which obviously you could just fucking write in. So, on one of the recent Tiger Belly episodes, they kind of went over this at the beginning of the episode, and apparently Schaub's team feels like they want to handle things internally now. So I don't know if this is a federal fucking case, which it kind of does make sense why they can't share this info, and why Schaub's being kind of shady and not releasing a lot of information. And it just kind of seems like everyone's working on not enough information, from fucking Callen screaming at Bobby to Kalaila reacting to things on fucking Dumois. It's like, it's a lot of he said, she said, and it's a lot of, again, like I said, going off missing information. It's almost like people who say they're not good at math. They're not good at math because maybe one day you missed a lesson or one concept you didn't understand, and things just kept moving on, and you kept trying to fill in your own gaps, even though that foundation was totally ruined. So it's this straw man thing that both these people are creating, where it's like the foundation is wrong. You don't have the full story. Maybe because Schaub has to hold it back because of the feds. Maybe he has to. Maybe his lawyers are saying, don't be just giving out this information to anybody, especially the people who actually their name is involved with it. Or again, it's also as simple as, did Schaub just see Bobby's involved with this somehow, and it finally put a name to the face and a face to the name, and someone to actually, channel his anger and frustration and insecurity at, and the fact that it was someone he knew, and then he got Callan involved with it. It's so interesting. And so again, does he want to handle it internally because he knows he fucked up and he's trying to weasel out of it now, and Kalila thinks he just wants to slow play things and just let things filter away. But again, she's very determined and she seems very offended and very, very defensive, which I understand. And, if people's, especially your loved one and yourself, her career was being threatened too, by going to Rogan and doing all this crazy shit. And, again, she thinks that Schaub came up with all the Reddit stuff to make it seem like it wasn't about what Trash Tuesday said about him and that they're spreading rumors. But fuck, man, like he kind of did the shit that they were talking about. But for some reason, Kalila wants Schaub to admit this so badly. I don't really understand why. Let's just go through it. So if Schaub was like, all right, the only reason I freaked out and yelled at Bobby was because you guys said that shit about me on your podcast and shit. But that's not even what he was yelling at him about. But anyway, if that's what it was about, then... And Schaub said he should have just went to Kalila and he could have avoided a lot of this stuff. But are the lawyers only involved because of this whole federal shit? Or did he actually threaten to sue them for libel or slander, or who knows? It's very, very, very convoluted. But I just don't understand why. So again, if Schaub admits to just being like, yes, I went to sue you because you fucking slandered my name and we're talking shit. I guess it's only slander and libel if what you said is not true. But I guess he's still denying the whole truck story, and and it's not about the DMs. But anyway, again, I don't understand why Kalila wants him to admit that it's about that. Because even if he does, even if he says, yes, okay, it was about what you guys said, they said some bad shit. They said he was unfunny, blah, blah, blah. They hurt his feelings. So she just wants to be like, ooh, like, is that where it's going to be? Like, as soon as he says that, she's going to be like, ooh, big baby, you just hurt your fucking feelings and you're going to sue us now? So again, the lawyers involved is very strange. And like throughout this whole event, through the Tiger Belly episodes, blah, 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 she hasn't apologized for anything, and what I think she should apologize for, to be clear, is saying what she said about Brendan. And again, it's not a cancelable offense. The whole thing isn't bad. Even what Brendan did with her and just was hitting on her and stuff. And if he denies what he did to Annie, that's whatever. But nothing happened. So like this whole thing is so small and it fucking became so big. And again, is this all real? Does Brendan just feel overwhelmed with the hate and he saw that it might be coming from a friend and he just snapped along with Brian? So is it, again, I don't know. Or is this all just a coincidence that there's also this weird child abuse shit going on and the fucking feds are involved? Now, like I said, I don't know why people are acting like this or how they took this one little thing. But again, stress and insecurity can make a mountain out of a molehill and make those little small things explode. Look at this whole fucking Amber and Johnny thing. It's ridiculous. I don't want to even go into it too much. But, people that are on the brink and are stressed with their jobs or pushed to the limit or tired and stressed and exhausted do fucking wild shit. And maybe that's not the perfect example. But when people are doing stuff that you'd never even imagine another human could possibly do, like stress and insecurity start to come into play. There's times where anyone can be stressed and want to lash out or bail from things and peace out. And if you feel trapped and you want to split and you want to do this whole thing, I totally understand when that comes from that stress and that insecurity of you're going, I don't know if I'm going to be able to survive. And these survival instincts come into play, and you start doing things that you never expect you'd do. You start making moves that you would have never made but only because you were stressed and freaking out, you started doing them. I think there's times where two stressed people can come into play, and that's where major friction happens, where someone's going through some heavy shit in life and they run into another person that's going through heavy shit, and they fucking clash because both people feel insecure, and you're both backed into a corner, and you fucking and you lash out and you freak out. And like I said, this is all pretty dumb, but humans crave this kind of conflict. They crave seeing these things. Again, the Amber and Johnny thing, again, that's probably even a better example, is just looking at these train wrecks and seeing people fuck up so much. It's almost like we want to see that because we want to understand when bad shit does inevitably happen, how can we get out of it? Or there's that Schadenfreude thing where we get some pleasure in the misfortune of others. But again, this whole thing where understanding that other people do wild shit, and we go, how could they possibly do that? What were they thinking? How could they do that? What the hell? They were probably fucking stressed beyond belief. And once you get to that point, until you get to that point, you never really understand what stress can really do. So all I ask of everybody is, when you go out there, if you're stressed, remember that other people might be stressed too. And even if you're not stressed, if you did your stretches today and you're meditated and you're happy and you're healthy, remember other people are stressed out there too. And if there's any friction, just understand they're going through it too. And everyone wants to feel at ease, and everyone wants to feel without stress. They want to feel like they're without stress. And if you can do that somehow to the people and the people the people you love, the people you run into in life, then maybe we can lower that cumulative stress, because that whole our whole collective unconscious, it's affected by those feelings. So if we can all do something and reduce the stress in other people's lives, then it's all going to be great. That was a great episode. Thanks everyone for listening. If you do get a chance, I know it doesn't take much, but please give us a 5-star review if you like the podcast, wherever you're listening. Please like and subscribe to the video on YouTube. Hit us up in our DMs on our podcast, or at Instagram or Twitter at the Bigmark Podcast, at the Bigmark Pod. Like I said, hit the bell, subscribe to the channel, and if you want to give us a little bit of support, hit us up on our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. Again, thank you so much for listening. I love you all. Stay stress-free. Talk to you soon. Peace.